Hey, Float Magic fans, Shawnee coming to you today in a little bit cozier of an atmosphere and presence because we're going to be talking about something a little heavy on the heavy side. We're going to be talking about grief and why we have such benefits in our modalities for people dealing with grief. I know I've touched on this in other podcasts. I'll probably touch on it again because it really is something that people utilize our center for. They are seeking after things to help them find acceptance and some reduction of stress and just to take their mind to a better space. And we have that here at Float Magic for people. So, and the reason this topic is coming up for me is because I have been in a space where I've dealt with a lot of grief in my personal life lately, at a pretty consistent level. It's kind of hit me back to back this year in more ways than I've anticipated. You don't anticipate grief. Sometimes it's very sudden when you experience a loss. And just to quantify what grief can encompass, I mean, it is grief of loss, which could be loss of job, loss of a family member, loss of a community, loss in your community, which I know we have dealt with that too much in our wonderful community. Loss of identity can happen pretty easily when you're going through transitions and trying to figure out who you really are grounded with in yourself. So really wanted to touch on that because of what I'm experiencing in my own life. And I know that followers that I have on Facebook have been super supportive through these times of grief, and that has just been fascinating to me also to see how a community responds in certain ways. So first of all, I wanted to talk about the stages of grief, which a lot of you are probably very familiar with. Stage 1 is denial, numbness, and shock. Unfortunately, when a grief happens immediately, so much of what people are dealing with, especially when it's a loss of a family member or a friend, people are in that process of dealing with the funeral and people coming out, and it seems like the first few weeks of something of that happening, it's just all this, it's almost inundated and people just go in this reactive mode of just going through the motions to get things done. And when grief really sets in, when that denial and numbness and shock wears off, it's long past the time when people are truly gathering to support people in their grief process. That's, after the first few weeks of that happening and you're all alone in your space and you realize the magnitude of the loss you just experienced. That's sometimes when people don't have support. That's sometimes when people aren't having people reach out to them or bring them food or gather with them, except for their very close friends and family. And so that's when they can start going into the next stages of grief, which is bargaining. Bargaining is kind of that process of, did this really happen? Or this is why it happened? Or why did this happen? And, trying to go back and forth as to making sense of the tragedy or the transition is the next phase of that. And then depression sets in. And depression can last a very long time. All of these stages are cyclical too, right? Like you can go from depression back to bargaining or bargaining back to shock. You can move through all these phases back and forth. Nobody grieves the same. Everybody grieves a little differently. Everybody has these lives to live. Sometimes they have to go back to numb and show up for family and their job or their role in the community, whatever that might be. They kind of have to take on this complete persona of everything's okay, but deep down, they're just pushing that grief down. So anger is the phase after depression. Some people can stay in. I personally stayed in anger a very, very long time through my recent grieving process. I was angry at myself. I was angry at situations. I was angry at society and what's acceptable. And I was just angry of all these things that probably had no sense me being angry at them, but I just was angry. And so you see people in this phase, and that's why people talk about being kind, because you just don't know what people are going through. And to use your words so wisely. And even as people are going through grief, they can lash out and say things that they don't mean, and they aren't really within their own true nature of who they are because of the grieving process. And then eventually, once you get through all of those patterns, those first 4 of numbness and bargaining, depression, and anger, you eventually get to the space of acceptance. And that acceptance piece is what Float Magic really likes to help you facilitate, is just allowing all of those phases to be. Because the only way that you're going to get to the other side of grief is by honoring and allowing all those emotions to come to the surface. One of the best things somebody told me through my grieving process was be angry. Allow yourself to be angry, because that's an emotion that is telling you something about your core values and your core belief system that you feel an injustice toward. That is showing you versions and pieces of yourself to let you know what truly matters and where your priorities are. And it was so valuable for me to not just push anger to the side, because that's not who I am. I'm usually not an angry person. And so just being absorbed in the anger, and even lashing out a little bit in safe spaces. I lashed out in not very safe spaces either. So, I mean, we're all human, right? We go through those things, unfortunately. But lashing out in a safe way with people that are safe can be so valuable. But back to that acceptance piece. We provide such a serene atmosphere here of acceptance and non-judgment and vulnerability. That's the safe space that people need to really feel like they're able to process this and go through those human emotions in a very healthy way. I have a chair up front, and I swear it's a vortex of a chair. Because I've had individuals sit in that chair, and after their float or after some services that they've used, they'll just sit in that chair and they'll just talk, and they talk and they talk, and they're processing, because so much of what happened in their stillness, so much of what happened while they allowed themselves to be still, was all this stuff came up to the surface. And all of these emotions were allowed to just be and just be present. And because of that, they're needing to process it. And so they do. They open up. They start piecing things together. They start understanding why they're responding the way that they are. I had one mother one day go through the entire experience of losing her daughter. And it was so, I could just tell in her face that it was such a healing process for her. And there was a lot of gratitude that arose during that interaction, that I was sitting in the chair across from her, watching her go through the healing process. And that acceptance piece was in that moment. Doesn't mean that you're not going to cycle back into a lot of the other phases of grief again, but just the mere fact that she had come to this place where she could piece it all together and was at acceptance of what happened is going to move her forward through healing the rest of the aspect. So another area of grief that we don't always pay mind to is, people transition through life. There's children that leave for college. Empty nest syndrome can happen. There's there's individuals who retire, and all of a sudden, retirement looks and feels like this really happy space, but there's actually a grieving process that happens when you leave something that you went to daily, or, that was such a big piece of your life. It was such a big piece of your identity. And so a lot of individuals come in here when they're like, I have all this time on my hands. I want to come in and now take care of myself. And what happens through that practice, and I know I talk about practice in our services because it is vitally important to get the most out of our services, is to use it as a practice. Just like a yoga class, going one time to a yoga class is great. You get a nice stretch, you get a good feel, but your body's not going to adapt to the full benefits of yoga unless you continue to go and use it as a practice. Well, it's the same with floating and our Novathor or sauna use and cold plunge. The more often you come in to use it, the more adaptive your body is in allowing yourself to get into that atmosphere and allowing your body to be in that space where that healing naturally happens. It might take a long time, that first float, to get to a relaxed state. It's why we tell people 3 times. 3 times in the Nova, 3 times in the float. Just give yourself those 3 times. It's okay. That's just going to be our go-to all the time. 3 times. 3rd time's a charm, right? Not always is it a charm, but it really does allow people to see the progression of what their mind and body and spirit can do in the atmosphere that we've provided here. And so you get in that practice and you allow yourself to be in, to feel those feelings over and over, to have those emotions rise to the surface. And then you can deal with them. So much of what we hold in the way of trauma, grief, emotional wounds, we hold in our bodies. I know I've talked about this in the past, but we house them. When we can't express them and when we can't process them, we put them in a little bundle and we house them somewhere in our body. Maybe it's in our gut. Maybe it's between the shoulder blades or in the neck. I have a lot of stuff stored back there for myself. Still working through a lot of that. Maybe it's in headaches. Maybe we get migraines that come up. Maybe it's a knee or a hip, a joint. Maybe it settles in a joint somewhere. We're still learning so much about how our emotional and nervous system responds and how our body it truly keeps the score of everything that we've ever been with, or been through. So when we house that in our body, we have to give it an opportunity to arise and come out. And it's very hard to do in the day-to-day when you're out there at your job or constantly on the phone, or maybe you have to go from appointment to appointment to appointment. It's really difficult for us to have a feeling that comes up in our body and to take a moment and just focus on it, which is the best thing we can do. In that moment is when you have a twinge somewhere in your body, you just focus on that so you can understand how it feels, what preceded it. Maybe there was a trigger. Maybe there wasn't a trigger. Maybe it's a certain day, like, oh yeah, this is the anniversary of some traumatic event, some loss. But in our services, you don't have those distractions coming in. You don't have the constant berating of stimulus to divert your attention. And so you really put yourself in a space of listening to that body part that's speaking to you, listening to that piece that you've buried that pain in, and giving it a voice to come out and allowing your mind and your body to connect so you can deal with that. That's why our services are so very valuable, is that stillness, that peace. We in modern day society are so starved for those moments of silence We're so starved for those moments of boredom. Like, think about our upcoming generations. Do they even know what boredom is? Like, there is such value in being bored. That's where creativity is spawned, is when you're bored and you're just sitting, and then your mind is allowed to come up with a new idea or a process. Well, the same happens in the grief process. If we are constantly feeding stimulation and distraction to what we're trying to deal with, it's going to prolong dealing with that. It's why people don't get over things for years. It's a very natural reaction for us to just pull whatever stimulation we can around us and feed it into that distractive process. So truly putting yourself in a space where you're distraction free is mindful work. It's intentional work. You're putting yourself in a space to heal. And when you go in with that intention to heal, when you know exactly what it is that you're working on, that healing process can expedite. Even if you don't have the intention, even if you're just like, I just need quiet. I just need to get away from the kids, get away from the spouse, get away from my coworker, wherever it might be, get away from my phone that inundates me all the time. And you come in here and things arise that you're not even cognizant of what you need to deal with in that. So that is kind of our pride and joy here, is that we truly are such a safe, vulnerable space that we can allow people to do that. In the hiring process for my employees, we go through quite a few interviews, and they shadow with us. But one of the most important aspects of the employees that I have here, I want to call them coworkers because that's how I see them. I'm not their boss. I work alongside them. Wonderful, wonderful people. But the quality that we're looking for is that they don't pass judgment. When you walk in this door, you are exactly who you are. We don't put labels on anybody. We're not trying to say, oh, they're here to spend this or they're here to do that. There is no expectations that we place on our clientele. And I really think our clientele can feel that. I really feel like people walk in this door and we see them go, huh. They just leave it all at the door. They leave it outside because in this space, they are who they are. They can just be. And we're very proud to deliver that to our community, because there's not many spaces that you really can go outside of nature, which we're so fortunate to live in this beautiful Magic Valley, to have access to so much of the nature. There's not many places you can go and just be exactly in the moment that you are. So how do you use our services to deal with grief? Let's say that you are contemplating moving into a new career. That is a huge transition. You're leaving a lot of your identity behind. Come into our salt cave. Take an hour in there just to sit, maybe do a brief meditation for yourself. You have to breathe in deep to take in the salt that's going in the air anyway. Go ahead and take advantage of that in that session and think through what that transition is going to look like. Maybe you're in the phase of bargaining or numbness, and you're trying to numb what's happened to you, no matter what the grief-stricken process is. Maybe your body is in dire need of some detox, and that's what our saunas can provide for you. You can sit either in our IR sauna, our infrared sauna, or our traditional sauna and truly just sweat it out and take those moments of quietness, put some music through our system. Just take those moments to let your body process what it's going through. Maybe you're in the phase of depression and you really need a boost. It's hard to get out of bed some mornings when you're in depression. It's hard to be present with people when you're in a depressive state. Our Novathor bed can absolutely provide that boost and that inflammatory reduction and that activation of your mitochondria for your cells, and just give you that boost of energy so you can move forward. Or maybe you're just really needing to get to the space of acceptance. And flotation therapy is one of the absolute best therapies for interoception that we can ask for. We're so fortunate to have this type of environment where everything's taken away and all we are is who we are in that space. So many people come out of their float with this sense of acceptance that it's very rewarding to see as an employee, as a business owner, as working so passionately to bring these services to our community. It truly has made an impact on us. How many of you out there have taken the opportunity to utilize us for what you're going through? So with that, I just want to share a bit of gratitude. We are in gratitude season, which should be all year round, of course, but we are really turned back to gratitude and focus on that now. And so grateful to this community for receiving us in the way that you have. You have validated my visions and my dream of providing a space where people can come and heal and focus on their wellness and put themselves in a trajectory to be the best version of themselves. That is such rewarding work for me. And I'm beyond grateful that you have provided that for us so that we continue to serve our community in that capacity. So with that being said, I'm going to just put a little gratitude up to salt and say it is absolutely okay to stay salty. And we really hope that you continue to do so with us. Thanks, friends.